Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Squadron, President of Our Energy Policy, and welcome to our webinar today on transportation fuels, energy independence, and national security issues. We hope all of you are healthy there and doing well, and we're delighted to have you join us for today's event. We are very fortunate to have as our featured speaker Yossie Hollander, who is the chairman and founder of Fuel Freedom Foundation, and who will be speaking about transportation issues in this part 2 of our focus on transportation. And as some of you already have, and I'd encourage all of you to do, we are accompanying our conversations through this webinar with an online discussion on the Our Energy Policy website, which we would be delighted to have all of you participate and weigh in with your thoughts on these issues. Now, as we always do toward the end of this hour, we will also open up the conversation to questions from the audience. As you see on the right-hand side of the GoToWebinar screen, there's an opportunity to ask questions. If you have a question, just type it in, hit submit, and we will get to as many questions as we possibly can after Yossie Hollander's presentation and his conversation with Karen Wayland, CEO of KW Energy Strategies, who will be discussing these issues with Yossie Hollander after he finishes his presentation. We're going to get to it in just a second. I see people sort of logging in quickly, so I want to give everybody a chance to get on. I do want to thank our partners, Broadscale, Con Edison, National Grid, Schiff Hardin, and US Grid, as well as BP, the underwriter of this series, and we're very grateful for their support. One thing I would point out is that Yossie Hollander, in addition to his chairmanship of Fuel Freedom Foundation, on which in whose capacity he's here today, is also the chairman of Our Energy Policy. And we're very grateful to him for having started this organization, which, as you all know, is a nonpartisan platform to foster serious civil discussion about critical energy issues. And Mr. Hollander is here today in his capacity as chair of Fuel Freedom. So I'm going to turn it over to him to get started. Again, remind you, if you have any questions, there's a GoToWebinar help document in the login on the right. There's also some information about OEP. Again, thank you for joining us today. I encourage all of you to think about questions to ask. And at this point, we're going to turn it over to Yossie Hollander to begin the conversation. Yossie?
Thank you, Bill, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad you're all logged in to spend time with us. Let me try and put the presentation up, and we'll start from there. All right, so the United States have been trying to become energy independent for more than 40 years. This presentation is about that issue largely. But since we made this presentation, some changes happened in the oil market. We have COVID, we have quite a lot of reduction in demand, but this presentation is not about that. We will answer some questions regarding this, the current situation, what happened later on in the Q&A section. But right now, let's look at 2019, what happened then, and what perhaps will happen in the years to come. So are we energy independent? You probably heard the following sentence: the United States is energy independent. It's actually not true. You also heard the United States is a net exporter of energy. That is largely not true. We'll explain that. And the US is the larger producer of oil. Depends really how you define oil. So let's review the numbers. So is the US energy independent? Well, if you calculate our net imports, that is imports minus exports, they were 192 billion in 2019. The US is a net exporter of energy? No, maybe in molecules of oil and gas, etc., just in molecules, but not in dollars. Is the US larger producer of oil? Well, depends what's oil, but the refinable oil, we're one of the top 3, and it really doesn't matter, and we will explain why. So the history of energy independence started in the 70s. We had a few crises that happened in 73 and 79. People were standing in lines, fighting for oil. It really hit our economy very, very hard. So when people invented the term energy independence in the 70s, what they really meant was oil. They went, how can we be oil independent, not energy independent? And the goal was 20 years. So here's some of an accounting on our successes and failure. So successes first. We eliminated petroleum use in electricity production. We hardly use petroleum anymore in the electricity sector. We also reduced our reliance on petroleum in the chemical sector. It's largely natural gas and other types of petroleum products. We improved car and truck fuel efficiency largely in the first 10 years and slowly over the next 30 years. Then we also converted our heavy truck fleet to diesel. Most people don't know, most of it was running on gasoline in the 70s. It took us 10 years and we converted it to diesel, which at least is somewhat more efficient than gasoline. We also diversified our import sources. Instead of importing everything from the Gulf state, now we import from a variety of countries. So we're not dependent on just one country for imports. So it's more of a security issue. But most importantly, probably we reversed the decline in US oil production, the shale revolution, and reaching one of the top 3 producer status. We'll discuss that in much more depth as we continue. Now, our failures are, again, interesting. 92% of our transportation is still oil dependent. We're still dependent on global oil prices, and we'll discuss that in much more depth. Then we have oil imports are still represent 31% of our trade deficit. This is something most of you are probably surprised. And protecting our oil flow still consumes 30% of our defense budget and everything related to Iran, according to Rand Institute. And our foreign policy, of course, is still captive to foreign oil interests. And you can see it every month or two where we're not doing what we want to do because of oil. As somebody once said, we would not invade oil, we would not come to the help of Kuwait if Kuwait grew broccoli. So let's talk about energy, okay? So we're talking about oil, but the term energy is used really to confuse us. I don't like the term at all. I'll give you an example. Energy prices are rising. What does it mean? Does it mean that coal prices are rising? No, it usually means that oil price is rising. It could be at the same time that coal price is going down, but we use it as energy prices. We should say oil, we should say coal, we should say natural gas. Energy, there's no such a thing as an energy price. Another one, the US a net exporter of energy. So when you hear that, most people think we're a net exporter of oil, but the truth is that we export coal, natural gas, ethanol, non-refinable oil, gasoline, and diesel. We don't export real oil at all. And when we count energy molecules, we're maybe a net exporter. But, you know, it's like you don't count the food number of apples, but how much they cost. So the dominant use of energy in the US is power generation. In most cases, and transportation. In most cases, the energy sources are very different. Power is a mix of natural gas, coal, nuclear, etc., while transportation is almost exclusively petroleum. There's no energy problem. There's no energy dependence problem. It is an oil problem. So how do we know if someone is a Republican or Democrat? You ask me, why do I even ask this question? Okay, here. Well, let's see. So one of the ways to do it is ask them, what's the best way to replace oil as our driving fuel? If they say nuclear, then he or she is likely a Republican. If they say solar and wind, he or she is likely a Democrat. The interesting thing about it is that none of these answers are correct, because we do not use oil to produce electricity, and nuclear is a form to produce electricity, and so is solar and wind. We hardly use electricity in the transportation sector. So, and you don't see, I've never seen yet a car running on a nuclear reactor on its roof. Let's look at the energy consumption in the US. This is a 2018 data, because the EIA data for 2019 was not 100% available at the time we produced this a month ago. As you can see, oil, petroleum by molecules, etc., by energy source, by BTU, is 36%. Natural gas, 31%. But is this the real measure? I don't think so. The next graph is a more interesting one. You've probably never seen it, because this is the money graph. This is based on wholesale prices. For example, prices that electricity company will pay for natural gas, price the refinery will pay for petroleum. These are wholesale prices. So you actually look at the dollars of US energy consumption, you're now looking at that most of it, 75%, is petroleum, over 500 billion. Natural gas is only 14, coal is 4%, 25 billion. So this is a whole different picture about where our energy problem is, and we always have to look at the money, not at molecules. This is another interesting graph, because this one shows the retail prices. Here you see that petroleum is down from 74% to 55%, but it's 645 billion, still the largest portion of everything. Natural gas and coal are up dramatically. So you ask yourself, why is that? The main reason here is that the oil distribution is a competitive private market, while the electricity market is a highly regulated monopolistic entities. And as a result, they charge a premium, which causes the prices for the consumer to rise much more than they should have probably. But still, petroleum is our main problem. Let's talk a little bit about oil here. So US oil production in 2019 was just over 12 million barrels a day. We were #1 in the world, but were we? Our refinable oil production was actually 9.5 million barrels. So where's the difference coming from? Well, there's something called condensate. These are lower energy value molecules that cannot be converted to gasoline or diesel at any reasonable price. Now, in the past, they were not counted as oil. But about 10 years ago or so, the EIA decided to change the definition of oil to include condensate. So the net result, of course, that we could declare that we produce more than 50% of our oil. Well, in reality, that was not the case. What's really happened in the last 12 years in the US is the shale revolution, and it is a revolution. People don't realize, but the advancement in technology of the last 10 years in the shale space are probably more than the previous 50 years in the entire oil industry. We now can access oil we couldn't access before at much, much, much cheaper prices. Within 10 years, we were able to increase our production of oil from 5 million to 12 million barrels a day. That's quite incredible, okay? But we're producing 9.5 million barrels of refinable oil is definitely bringing us closer to energy independence, but it doesn't. Let's look a little bit more under the hood. So shale is very different from a traditional oil well. Traditional oil well produces largely oil. Shale oil produces a lot of things. Of course, oil, refinable oil, light oil, by the way, that is priced a little bit lower than the regular heavier oil. Natural gas, very cheap, and we have too much of it. And condensate, also very cheap, industry feedstock for the chemical industry, etc. And even lighter carbohydrates called HCLs. They're extremely cheap, and they're also industry feedstocks or burned, because we don't have too much of them. So when you're looking at the shale revolution, it's really a natural gas and others revolution, not just an oil revolution. And that has tremendous impact. Let's look a little bit at the numbers, because this is the oil flow numbers, I call them. This is our US production. Look at the main numbers here. Okay, we produce 9.5 million barrels of refinable oil a day. We also produce over 5 million other liquids, which are largely unused, and some of them are priced at ridiculous prices, even negative. We import 6.5 million barrels of oil a day in 2019. That is an amazing number. So this is something people are not realizing, because everybody thinks we are exporters. We export oil at the same time. So you ask yourself, why are we exporting oil? And the reason we're exporting oil, there are many, but some of them, for example, has to do with the type of oil that we have that doesn't fit our refineries. So we import heavier oil and export lighter oil that can work with other refineries around the world. But there are many issues. This is how the markets work. We both export and import many of our products here. Now, the US shale revolution was under financial distress even before the COVID. Most people were forecasting bankruptcies in the sector towards the end of the year. With the COVID phenomena, it happened just quicker. The problem is that it wasn't producing returns for investors, and as they were hoping for, and they got tired. So they stopped funding a lot of the shale producers, and a lot of them were really very highly loaded with debt. If you look at Whiting Petroleum, one of the largest frackers, they went from a market cap of 13 billion in 2014 to 60 million around March, and then to bankruptcy. And that happens a lot. There's a massacre happening employment-wise in the shale sector, and a lot of our production basins are basically shut down. The problem is the cost of producing shale oil in many places is still very, very high and very sensitive to oil price swings. So right now, at the current world prices, you can't produce shale profitably. And also, because of the surplus of natural gas, those prices have dropped dramatically, so people can make very little money on the natural gas, and also very little money on other products. So the question is how to make the shale sector healthy. The problem is it relies largely on oil. I think if we develop markets for natural gas and other NGLs, this will raise the price, both their prices and volume, and we can sell them. Just to give you an example, if we decided to replace all of our oil imports with natural gas-based fuels, we can increase our natural gas market by 40%. This will be a bonanza for the oil sector and for the shale sector, and will stabilize their value. They won't go bankrupt anymore. And will transform, of course, our transportation market, eliminate our import, etc. This is just an example of using the shale revolution in a completely different way. Now you ask yourself, why am I even bothering with the health of the shale revolution? Okay, and what is that to do with energy independence? So let's go back to square one to energy independence. So the question is, if we produce all of our oil, would we be energy independent? And the answer to that is surprisingly no, because we'll always be subject to the world price of oil. So to give you an example, Russia and Saudi Arabia decided to flood the market with oil, and oil prices crashed. So our shale producer, even before COVID, were about to go bankrupt. So anytime two theocrats like this decide that they want to fight our shale producer, they'll go bankrupt. This is not a healthy situation. And when OPEC decides to cut production, like in the past, to create a tighter oil market and oil prices rise, in the past it has caused recession in the US and the rest of the world. So we're again, even if we produced everything and the price of oil went to 100, there will be a recession in the United States. So we're not immune from the price of oil. Energy independence is really immunity from the price. And the only way to create immunity from the price is to create a competitive transportation market, including oil. So we will produce oil. But we need competition to oil from natural gas and natural gas liquid. We need more ethanol from biomass. We need other biofuel like renewable diesel. We need electric vehicles. We need compressed natural gas. But all these solutions that you see out here are all economically competitive to oil. They're in many cases even 30% cheaper. But the market is currently blocked by various government and market barriers that could be removed. The truth is we're very close to being able to remove them. Maybe we'll discuss them a little bit later on. But if we do that, we unleash the power of American industry, American shale, American innovation, and we will have that energy independence at a cheaper price for the consumer. Thank you very much. That is the summary of the presentation, and at this point, I'll be happy to open it for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yossi. So again, I'd like to encourage all of you, if you have questions, to submit them in writing. I would also like to point out that the presentation is available on YouTube. So if you want to, subsequent to this, look at it more carefully, share it with colleagues. If you go to YouTube and Fuel Freedom, you'll be able to find the presentation in its entirety. We're very grateful to Yossie Hollander for sharing that with us, one of the world's experts on this topic. We're also delighted to have with us today, and here she is, Karen Wayland, who is the CEO of KW Energy Strategies and the former Deputy Director for Local and State Cooperation at the Department of Energy. And Karen will have a conversation now with Yossi about the presentation, about these issues, following which we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. So thanks very much to everyone, and take it away, Karen and Yossi.
Great, Yossi. That was a lot to unpack. Let's just start with the big question, because we're all sitting at home here, not driving our cars. And you said, you're starting in 2019 data, and you're looking forward to 2021, where we might be back to normal. Do you think that the transportation sector is going to be untouched by what's happening this year, and will that affect how we use fuels?
So definitely it will change. We don't know how much. At some point in time in the future, I can't tell you if it's 2021 or 2022, we will catch up. Yes, because the world demand is growing, because there's not because so much because of us, but because a lot of countries are moving to the middle class and buying more cars. Okay, we have 1.1 billion cars in the world today, and the forecast by 2050 is 3 billion cars. So I would assume that will increase eventually oil demand. But right now, it's actually a very interesting situation. Oil demand went down 30% because of COVID to 70 million barrels a day. It's now back to 85. Will it go back to 100? Nobody knows. It's like, will people drive less because they work more from home? Perhaps. But if people are leaving the big cities and now going to be living in the suburbs and are going to drive 2 days now home to home, will they use less public transportation because they're more afraid of viruses? We really don't have any model to say what will really happen here. I mean, we can see, I think the effect will be on all sides. The big effect will be economy. Okay, so if the economy is going to recover, then oil demand is going to recover. If the economy is going to recover slowly, oil demand will recover slowly.
I know another thing is I was fascinated by the data that you have it's a pretty data-rich presentation, especially the follow the money, what you actually pay, because that is not a way of thinking about how we use fuels in this country. And can you talk a little bit about how you came up with these numbers? Because you've got natural gas for heating, you've got natural gas for power generation, you've got different end users in the petroleum sector. So how did you come around with that data?
So it's all EIA data, it's not our data, okay? So EIA has tons of data, but they just usually produce just summaries. But you can actually go dig yourself in all this data, you just have to understand how to read them. And I can tell you it's not easy to read, okay? So what does this table mean? It says on the top, but then you have to call somebody and learn, and that somebody in the EIA, in the Department of Energy will tell you, well, This is how we calculate it. It's actually 6 months old, so you have to compare it to this number, etc. So it's like an expertise that we've developed at Fuel Freedom Foundation about analyzing the EIA data. But it's all EIA data. Nothing there is external data. It's not average price that you read in the market in New York, because the price of, let's say, natural gas in New York doesn't mean anything to the natural gas price in the back end, for example.
Right. So that $507 billion in money going out the door, do you know where it goes? And are there security implications?
Oh no, so a lot of it, so some of it is of course import. We know how much exactly we're importing, and we know exactly for which countries. But it really doesn't matter which country. Suppose we decided we don't want to import anything from Saudi Arabia or Russia. It doesn't mean a thing, because all it will mean is that somebody else will buy from Saudi Arabia and we will buy from another country. It really doesn't matter. It's the same old market. Right now it's overly supplied, but because there's of course a surplus of production capacity, but in a normal situation and relatively balanced, it doesn't matter who buys from what. It's just what really matters is the price.
Yeah, we're hostage to the global market.
Exactly.
So, well, so then talking about, we've got low oil prices, we've got very low natural gas prices, we have almost no market for natural gas liquids, for condensates, we're burning off ethane. How do we transform this domestic market so that there's actually market signals to capture the value there and turn it into transportation fuels?
So you have to look at what's the easiest way to do it, and you have to look sector by sector. So for example, the diesel sector and the gasoline sector are probably very, very different. So I think there's a lot of regulation you can do to remove obstacles from converting more trucks to running on CNG or variations of that. And that could work very, very well. There's a lot of mechanical equipment, a lot of trucks that are running on CNG. We can see buses running on CNG. And if that market is truly opened, it could happen very, very quickly. Right now, it's cost too much to convert your truck to run on CNG, and the regulations on CNG tanks are ridiculously expensive. Okay, with no reason, because we can compare the same regulation to European countries, and the price is a quarter. Okay. So we know it's not unsafe, it's just a regulation. If you look at the gasoline, the real issue, the big number here is natural gas liquid and natural gas to ethanol. Today we have technology to do that, okay, at prices that are equivalent or cheaper to gasoline. We just have to make sure we have cars that can take ethanol. Those are not necessarily ethanol, by the way. That car doesn't know if the ethanol came from natural gas or corn or from any other invention from Silicon Valley. It doesn't know. But there's a car called flex fuel, and if we can produce more flex fuel cars, more than the 20 million we already have on the road, all distributors of fuel in the country really want to implement to get more ethanol, because they make more money on ethanol than they make on gasoline.
So we're going to have ethanol, we're going to have potentially natural gas vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, electric vehicles. We're still going to have gasoline vehicles on the road. We're talking about a very diverse infrastructure that we're going to need across the country to transport it, to interface between the vehicle and the storage. What are the barriers for developing that diverse infrastructure?
So the interesting thing about this, everybody's been, one of the problems of the natural gas market, if we speak about it specifically, is piping. Okay, I don't know if you're looking, for example, today at Boston. In Boston, we import the natural gas from the Soviet Union because we can't get a pipe going from the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania to Boston. Okay, so piping the gas out of our gas field is almost impossible. The interesting thing about natural gas to ethanol, you can build a plant in the shale space itself, next to the shale wells. So you don't need piping out. And if you look, for example, at the map of the United States, 40% of the cars in the United States are within 500 miles of the Marcellus shales, which means you can actually produce the ethanol at the Marcellus shale and truck it out to most of the cars, or it's similar in other places across the US. So I think the infrastructure that we need, the changes to open the market, is the first one is to create regulation that will encourage the car manufacturer to produce more flex fuel cars. And it doesn't cost them anything more to produce a flex fuel car, or maybe a few tens of dollars, no more than that. But it opens the market, because then we have cars that can take either gasoline or ethanol, and that creates competition at the pump.
Do you see, so the energy independence factor has a lot to do with our kind of overall national security, our economic security, our position in the global space. Are there other benefits that we'll see if we have a more diverse fuel supply for transportation?
I think so, because we've reached a little bit of a plateau in terms of our air pollution strategies. If you look at, I mean, of course, we had a huge improvement in air pollution because we were not driving during the COVID pandemic, or we still are. But if you're looking at the long term, there's been a real slowdown in the benefits from air pollution. We now have studies that show that ethanol can immediately reduce the air pollution by 30%. This is a huge number. So moving to more ethanol, more electric cars, more CNG will reduce our air pollution dramatically. And air pollution is responsible for a large number of deaths in the United States, respiratory diseases and others.
So you just laid out all the different ways that we might power our vehicles. And you're talking about being energy independent perhaps in 10 years. If we go from 92% of our transportation fueled by oil to some mix in 10 years, what will that look like? How will we know that we're energy independent?
We'll know when there's a competitive market. So in Brazil, we know that which they use 50-50 ethanol and gasoline in terms of the market share. And we know that when the price of gasoline goes up, then the ethanol goes down, everybody switches to ethanol and vice versa. So they're actually attached to one another. Nobody can move up or down. So when we will see oil prices going up, and in the world, in the United States, the gas at the pump is not going up because people are switching to alternatives that are priced cheaper, then that's when we will know that we won the energy independence battle, because we're immune from the price. But of course, it will require some volume, okay? And that's why I say it will take 10 years to build all those plants and get more electric car and convert cars to CNG, for example, trucks. But if you look at creating a market, that could be very, very quickly. Today, if let's say the Trump administration and the car companies announced today that they're doing all cars flex fuel, that means that within 3-4 years, more than 25% of the cars on the road will be flex fuel. That's already enough to put an ethanol pump everywhere, in every gas station. It doesn't take that long. Building the plants will take some time. That's why I'm saying I'm not suggesting in a year you can take all the extra natural gas and convert it. That takes time. Okay, there's infrastructure investment.
So I know that we could spend hours and hours on a climate debate, but is there a policy push that would get you faster to this conversion? And if you layer a climate policy on top of this, will that, obviously that will change the fuel mix from today for 10 years, but will that be a driver for a faster conversion?
I'm not sure that climate policy itself will be a driver for faster conversion. Sometimes it can technically slow it. So if you're becoming, as I call it, overzealous, and you say, I only want electric car because that is eventually the optimal solution, you're basically delaying other climate benefits, let's say, of ethanol and other fuels that have some climate benefit. It's just smaller climate benefit. But you can do them today versus electric cars that will not reach 100% penetration within at least the next 40 years. So I always say, I call it the net present value of climate, okay? So I rather save 5% greenhouse gases today than 50% in 20 years with a better solution. So I think I think the key issue is that, yes, it could be climate policy, but I think it's really thinking about more of a market policy. You'll do a market policy, we'll get both the price policy, the air pollution benefits, and the climate benefit. Just to give you an interesting idea, so today's cars are tuned to run on gasoline. So even the flex fuel car is not optimized to run best on ethanol. So MIT did some studies and showed that if we decided that the car is running most of the time on ethanol and not on gasoline, and we retune the car to take advantage of the higher octane level of ethanol, we can double the fuel efficiency of the car. Mm-hmm. That is immediately benefits for everything. Okay, cost, climate, air pollution, etc. But that, again, this will be a process that will happen only when the larger portion of ethanol from wherever it comes from, okay, penetrate the market.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we could keep going on with the climate discussion because there's so many nuances and so many. I mean, it's not just a price on carbon. There are all sorts of signals that you'd have to send to define what the transportation sector will look like in 2030 and 2050. But I think that there's probably a lot of questions from the audience. So Kevin, do you want to take over and see what kind of questions we're going to get for Yossie?
Great, yes, thank you very much. Interesting discussion. We do have a lot of questions rolling in. Quick reminder to our audience, there is the questions submission box on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar user interface. So please go ahead and enter any questions you have. Our team will line these up and we'll get through as many as we can. As I said, we do have a lot rolling in already. First question here from Mauricio Bustillo. What are a few quick policy wins the government can take to remove current barriers to other transportation fuel options? What is preventing them from removing those barriers?
So I will give you three, okay? The first one is basically give the car manufacturer a few more credits, worth carbon and CAFE standard credits for producing more flex fuel cars. We had them in the past, they were very successful, they just kind of died. It will also solve the CAFE argument because you can use larger numbers and get the credits, everybody's happy, so to speak. The second one would be reducing the policy barrier. So we have right now, we're only allowed to use certain CNG tanks in the United States that are, let's say, more expensive. If we just implemented the European standard, that will lower the price of a CNG tank and will lower the price of all CNG cars and trucks and buses. A third one is there's some regulation that protect the battery cost. They're not protecting the battery cost, the consumer, they're actually increasing the battery cost of the electric car cost by at least 50%, if not 100%. Changing some of those rules, for example, the rule that says that the battery has to be good for 8 years. Doesn't make any sense. Let the market decide what is the best optimal price and per year for a battery. That will probably reduce the price of batteries by 30%, if not more. Those are just a few of the examples.
Great, well, thank you. And Karen, I don't want to ever step in front of you if you have something to add to any of these questions, so please feel free to weigh in as well.
That was three, so I'll let the three stand.
Perfect. Next question here is from Ron Bankston. Do you think it is too late for legislation that would push for advanced internal combustion engines optimized for alcohol fuel? The legislation would be similar to the unleaded gasoline national mandate.
I think the likelihood of a national mandate is, I would say, zero. There's big opposition to mandates, okay, in the Republican Party right now. It will never pass the Senate. I'm not judging whether it should or shouldn't. I'm just saying it's the likelihood. I think there's so many things that could be done through the EPA itself without any legislation, and they have the full authority to do that. I think after that negotiation between car manufacturer, California, Air Resource Board, and the government, I don't think, and the EPA, I don't think they're that far away from each other. I think just sitting down and putting a deal on the table, like they did, by the way, in 97, or yeah, 97 would be, and in 2007, sorry, would be great. So I think we can do things much faster than legislation without mandates. I would love to have a mandate, but I don't think it's a reality.
I doubt there'll be a mandate too, and I think that if you look at California's low carbon fuel standard, that sets a CO2 performance parameter for fuels rather than a mandate, and it is driving the development of biorefineries in the Midwest, putting fuels into low carbon fuels into pipelines over to California to meet the California market. So I think it's more likely to be fuel neutral market signals than mandates. That if obviously a low carbon fuel standard won't fly in the current Senate, but you don't know what. In addition to the COVID situation, you don't know what the Senate's going to look like in 2021.
Sure. Thank you very much. Next question here is from James Barrett. Given that oil prices can swing dramatically in a very short period of time, but the type of fuel we use in our cars can only change very slowly, how will competitive natural gas markets and others insulate us from oil price volatility?
Look, it's like any market. If we had just Sony as a producer of flat screen TV, we'd still be paying a few $1,000s per flat screen TV. Now, those markets, of course, are related, but it's a question of quantity, okay? So we know that when you reach larger numbers, 10, 20%, you don't have to have anything. Once there is an alternative that is realistic in price and quantity, we know in every other market, okay, it will be competitive. Okay. So is it going to take time? Yes. I think we need to have the optionality. So for example, if we have 100% of the cars or 50% of the car flex fuels, that means and every gas station has an ethanol pump. Don't know right now, by the way, where the ethanol is coming from, and it is supplied. Then there'll be competition because people like in the supermarket, they can go look at the shelf and they say, wait a second, today ethanol is cheaper. Wait a second, today oil is cheaper. It doesn't mean that we'll be completely immune, but when the more competition there is, of course, it's going to affect the price.
Thank you for the answer. Our next question here is a two-part, a few questions on hydrogen fuels coming in. So a quick comment from Ryan Block. Hydrogen is not an economically competitive technology to compete with oil. What are some of the market barriers and technical breakthroughs needed? And a follow-up from David Crombie. What role do you see for hydrogen-fueled vehicles in the future?
So I actually not a great believer in hydrogen, but if it succeeds, I don't mind. I mean, I don't have a preference. Okay, my read is that hydrogen is really an electric car powered by hydrogen. Okay, and the electric car technically is 20 years ahead of the hydrogen electric cars in terms of market acceptance, technology, infrastructure, etc. So by the time hydrogen is ready for market, the regular electric car penetration will be so high that I don't think hydrogen cars could penetrate the market. Now, other people don't agree with me, but that is my view of it's not an opinion whether it's good or bad, it's where it is in the adoption and the technology cycle.
Great, thank you very much. Next question here from Joanne Ivancic. Pieroberto Folgiero of NextChem wrote a thought piece published in Biofuels Digest that emphasized local production of renewable fuels and other formerly petroleum and natural gas-based products using materials close to location of production. Could this local production of renewable fuels address many of the challenges that you mentioned?
Volume-wise, I don't think so. Okay, it's when you say local production, you know, local is relative. Okay, so if you talk about local production of corn ethanol in Iowa, that's fine. If you're looking at the local production of natural gas to ethanol or CNG in the back end, that's good. Can you get really small local farm level? No, that's not economic. I don't think that's ever going to be economic. We need scale. This is a big market, guys. 20 million barrels a day average US consumption of all kinds of oil. It's a huge Think about 20 million barrels putting one on top of the other a day. It's not going to be by a mom and pop operation. It's a big infrastructure play. By the way, Goldman Sachs forecast this could add 0.4 points a year for the GDP growth if we do that infrastructure investment.
Thank you, Yossi. A follow-up from Joanne. What specific policy changes is the Fuel Freedom Foundation working on to have E85 or E30 pumps built?
So right now we focus on the ethanol portion of producing more flex fuel cars via EPA credits and via negotiation with between California and the administration and the car companies. The car companies are very much for it. By the way, a lot of the oil companies are now for it. A lot of people in the administration, corn growers are of course for it. So there's a bigger and bigger coalition for that to happen. Will it happen? You know, if I could forecast elections and government policy, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
Thank you very much. Next question from Philip Kahn. When comparing the effect on greenhouse gas emissions from natural gas to ethanol to emissions from gasoline-powered cars, do you account for methane leakage? If so, what is the CO2 equivalent emissions comparison between natural gas to ethanol versus gasoline-powered cars?
So one of the reasons we have a lot of leakage of methane or natural gas is because we have to transport it, or we don't have anything to do with it, so there's no incentive. Okay, if the value of the natural gas is lower and you can't send it anywhere, and then if it leaks or burns, you really don't care. If you can only sell oil, you're going to burn your natural gas unless you have regulations that prevent you from doing that. But assuming they weren't, so the incentives that exist right now is there's no market. The minute there's a market for your natural gas, this will take care of the methane leakage immediately, and not just methane, but largely ethane and other even lower carbon gases that are very, very interesting, and low carbon gases. And I think what this will create an incentive for people, oh, wait a second, I can get dollars for it. So now that leakage is worth, or burning it worth much more money. So I think actually creating a market for those kinds of carbohydrates will eliminate the leakage. Not just methane, by the way, there's others that leak, etc. People focus on methane leakage, but there's I think there is a bigger problem than methane in other liquids and other gases. But this will be eliminated because now they have a financial value, and there's an interest then for the oil producer to deliver them to the factory that will create ethanol from them.
Sure, thank you. Next question here from Tadashi Ogitsu. My understanding about the past failure of ethanol in the US is the food stock, corn being not particularly cost effective compared with sugarcane used in Brazil. What would you suggest if we were to try ethanol for transportation again?
So first of all, we are using ethanol for transportation. We're using 1 million barrels a day, okay? And the world is using now about 2.5 million barrels a day of oil. So when people look at oil consumption worldwide, they forget that we are actually counting ethanol as well. So when we say we're using 20 million barrels a day in the United States, we're actually using 19 of oil, and 1 million is and above is ethanol. I don't agree with the presumption that corn is more expensive than sugarcane. Today, it's actually the other way around. And the reason being that they just got better over the years, the regular American innovation. One of the reasons is natural gas, because the energy that they used to produce the ethanol from corn is now cheaper than the energy they used before, because the natural gas prices are lower. Everything is a little bit connected as well. So right now, I mean, right now the economics work both for natural gas to ethanol, and because the price is low. At $5 an MCF, it will not work. At 3 or 2, it works very, very well. And if you're looking at ethanol from corn today, the economics are very good. I mean, If you look at, I'm not talking about what we have today that all went down to $35. This is an anomaly or zero negative value that we had a while ago. I think the reality today is corn is very, very competitive. You can ask a lot of the distributors, they'll tell you they make more money on an ethanol pump than they make on a gasoline pump.
Well, thank you for that. Next question here from Bruce Bailey. Excuse me. How powerful are the political forces that are concerned about mitigating climate change? And are they therefore reluctant to open competitive markets for the range of transportation fuels you cite?
I think it's an interesting, I always say that climate change was a consensus and it became political, okay? So I said before Al Gore, climate change was a consensus. When Al Gore came in and made it political, it became a political issue. So I try to avoid the politics in that regard. I think, I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly, but I would basically look at market-based policy and instead of trying to look at climate policies. Okay, how do we do that? Then measure what's the effect on climate, what's the effect on air pollution. I'll give you an example. Suppose you have a solution that has zero effect on climate. It doesn't make it any better or any worse, okay, but it's very good for air pollution. Okay, should we adopt it or not adopt it? I think we should. We can't win everything. Some people will say, no, we should not adopt it. We should only go for the optimal electric car or whatever car solution. I'm saying, I'd love to have 3 electric cars, but I can tell you, in the next 40 years, the maximum penetration of electric cars in the world market will be 1/3 of the cars. No way it's going to be higher than that. So no matter what policies you implement. So if you look at the numbers and understand them deeply and where they're coming from, you just have to open the market and let market forces work. And a lot of the benefits will benefit everything: climate, economy, jobs, air pollution. Almost every solution we're looking at is good for everything.
I've been working on climate policy for almost 20 years now in the House when we passed Waxman-Markey, and I worked for the National Resource Defense Council on climate policy. And I think if you look at the deals that have been reached in a state like California, those deals on climate policy, whether it's AB 32, whether it's their low carbon fuel standard, whether it's their clean energy standard, they're all more performance based than technology specific for the most part. And so they represent a compromise across those different interests that you're talking about in terms of powerful interests, that in the end, we're looking at compromises that recognize that there needs to be a diversity of sources, whether it's for transportation or for electricity.
Thank you both. The next one is a kind of a summary of a few different comments we've received, political in nature here. Given what you've gone over in your presentation, Yossi, do you see claims that the U.S. is currently energy independent as being misleading or dishonest?
I think it's, so if you said today the following, first of all, we're not energy independent, okay, by any form. We're importing a lot of oil. Are we better off than we were before? Yes, okay. Now, especially if you look at the 70s where we use it in the oil on almost everything, of course we're better off. But we're not producing everything. When you say United States is the larger producers of oil and gas in the world, that is a true statement. Of course, most people hear it as we're a larger producer of gas, a larger producer of oil. But as each one of them. But it's actually only as a combination together in terms of BTUs, we're the world's largest producer. But we're not energy independent. So those are two different terms. They played around in the media like energy prices are rising, okay? That kind of a sentence. I don't know if it's a dishonesty. It's there's a lot of confusion in terms. This is a very complex subject. How many people know about condensate? How many people understand the difference between different types of oil? How many people know that we count ethanol as part of our oil production? Okay? Not many people know all the little details. It's a very complex. It's the largest market there is. Okay, so I don't know what to call it dishonest. I think we should just strive to put information on into the into the ether and have people discuss it. I don't think that's part of what our energy policy is doing, is having the information out there and have people discuss it. I don't want to say dishonest. It's not. I don't think dishonest is the right word.
Sure, it's a great answer. Our next question here, how much does it add to the average cost of a car to make it a flex fuel car? And were flex fuel cars to become more ubiquitous, would you see that cost coming down?
So that's a big argument about that. I mean, we have testimonies from all companies saying it is $100 per car. We know that most cars are actually built metal-wise as flex fuels, or a large portion of them today. And all you need to do is to change the software, and also then pass some tests, which has a regulatory cost of $10–20 per car. We know that when people produce an engine in Mexico, they don't know if the engine will go to the US or Brazil or to another country that doesn't have ethanol. So the engine is basically built to take any type of fuel, by the way, not just ethanol, everything, including methanol.
I'm going to jump in there because we really have reached the end of the hour, and I particularly want to not only thank everyone, but underscore the point that Yossi made a couple of minutes ago about the complexity of these issues. I thought it was an excellent question about how these matters often get portrayed either by the press or others who may not be fully informed or knowledgeable about it. These are complicated issues, and what we're really dedicated to is having serious discussions about these issues with people from various perspectives, and then helping to provide that as a resource to the media, to policymakers. And it's an uphill battle. These are difficult, complex issues, but we are, we feel helping to inform the conversation. We're working increasingly at OEP with people on Capitol Hill who are really dedicated to trying to get to the bottom of these issues in a serious way, with people in the administration, with those in state and municipal energy offices around the country. And we're very grateful to all of you who've attended and participate in the conversations, because all of that helps to allow us to do our job and to inform this conversation in a serious way. So first of all, I want to thank all of you who took the time to join us today. I encourage you to participate in the online dialogue on the OEP site. This webinar, we will have the recording available shortly. We'll let you know about it. Encourage you to share it with colleagues and others who could not make it today live, and let them know about it. My thanks also to our OEP team, Carolyn Best, Kevin Marin, Alicia Moulton, Helen Thompson, who've done a great job in putting together this entire series. We have another one coming up in a couple of weeks, which we'll let everyone know about. But my thanks to them. Also, of course, to our partners, Broadscale, Con Ed, National Grid, US Grid, and Schiff Harden, and our underwriter for this series, BP. And finally, last but far from least, to Yossie Hollander and Karen Wayland for undertaking this terrific conversation today about such a critical topic. We're very grateful. And again, I'd like to encourage all of you to participate with us online in the conversation and extend this and allow us to use your thoughts and perspectives to help inform the dialogue. Thanks again, everyone. Stay well, stay healthy, and please join us for our next webinar, which we'll let you know about over the next weeks to come. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Thank you.